Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and a very warm Christmas welcome to the Booms and Busts podcast. My name is Jonathan Davis. And of course, as we wend our way towards the end of March, when we will of course remain, that seems pretty clear now, I'd like to quote you from arguably the greatest libertarian, it's arguable of course, in British history, from the 17th century, Oliver Cromwell. It is high time for me to put an end to your sitting in this place, which you have dishonoured by your contempt of all virtue, and defiled by your practice of every vice. You are a factious crew and enemies to all good government. You are a pack of mercenary wretches and would, like Esau, sell your country for a mess of pottage, and like Judas, betray your God for a few pieces of money. Is there a single virtue now remaining amongst you? Is there one vice you do not possess? You have no more religion than my horse. Gold is your God. Which of you have not bartered your conscience for bribes? Is there a man amongst you that has the least care for the good of the commonwealth? You sordid prostitutes, have you not defiled this sacred place and turned the Lord's temple into a den of thieves by your immoral principles and wicked practices? You are grown intolerably odious to the whole nation. You were deputed here by the people to get grievances redressed, are yourselves become the greatest grievance. Your country therefore calls upon me to cleanse this Augean stable by putting a final period to your iniquitous proceedings in this house, and which by God's help and the strength he has given me, I am now come to do. I command you therefore, upon the peril of your lives, to depart immediately out of this place. Go, get you out, make haste, you venal slaves, be gone. Take away that shining bauble there, and lock up the doors. In the name of God, go. That could have been spoken in December of 2018, give or take, given clearly the treachery of the establishment, the elite, on the people. We'll come back to that. I thought we'd do something of a review of 2018 in the time-honoured fashion at the end of a calendar year. We'll then move on to economics and markets and how they're developing. I talked about recently Michelle Rempel, MP in Canada. She told us how Trudeau is going to be giving loads of money to his friends in the media, which means that free speech is dying as we speak. We've talked about the UN Global Compact on migration, and last week the European Union, on behalf of all EU countries, signed the compact, and it makes any objections to migration a hate crime. Big Brother Watch tells us that today, the 17th of December 2018, the police will use live facial recognition in London, scanning everyone in view, just like they do in China. Our dystopian future is coming rapidly, listener. And let me point out to you that those net-connected Christmas presents that you bought for your children, Santa really will know for next year if they've been naughty or nice, where they are, what they're doing and saying. And of course, hackers will also have that information very soon. You better believe it. Today, 17th of December, in 1989, The Simpsons first premiered. Oh! Definitely worth remembering. A week ago, the 11th of December, add on 100 years, 1918, a great man was born, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Arguably, he did more than anyone else to bring the brutal, callous, criminal, ugly, disgusting Soviet Union to its knees. I'm going to present to you part of a much longer essay by Michael Scammell, the author of Solzhenitsyn, a biography. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, pundits offered a variety of reasons for its failure. Economic, political, military. Few thought to add a fourth, more elusive cause: the regime's total loss of credibility. This hard-to-measure process had started in 1956, when Premier Nikita Khrushchev gave his so-called secret speech to party leaders in which he denounced Joseph Stalin's purges and officially revealed the existence of the Gulag prison system. Not long afterward, Boris Pasternak allowed his suppressed novel Dr. Zhivago to be published in the West, tearing another hole in the Iron Curtain. Then in 1962, the literary magazine Novy Mir caused a sensation with a novella set in the Gulag by an unknown author named Alexander Isaievich Solzhenitsyn. That novella, A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, took the country and then the world by storm. In crisp, clear prose, it told the story of a simple man's day in a labour camp where he stoically endured endless injustices. As a youth and then as a college student, Solzhenitsyn had been swept up in the revolutionary euphoria of the communist experiment and fervently believed in the premises of Marxism-Leninism. In World War II, he served as the commander of an artillery battalion and was awarded 2 medals for valour. But Solzhenitsyn's promising career was brutally cut short by his arrest in February 1945 on a charge of anti-Soviet activities. He was swiftly sentenced to 8 years of hard labour in the Gulag. His crime? Criticising Stalin and the Soviet army in letters exchanged with a school friend who was on another front. This Dickensian reversal of fortune plunged Solzhenitsyn into despair, but it also opened his eyes to the hideous underbelly of Soviet communism and gave him glimpses of the reign of terror and lies that had kept it going for so long. He'd already written poems, stories, and half a novel, most of them on patriotic themes. He now resolved to dedicate the rest of his writing life to exposing the monstrous machine that had, as he later discovered, murdered or incarcerated many millions like himself. He was eventually released, and for his critical approach to Soviet life, Solzhenitsyn was evicted from the state-sponsored Writers' Union and became a virtual outlaw in his own country. But he was far from alone. Many talented and independent writers were circumventing the Soviet censorship with a new publication format called samizdat. It consisted of self-published poems, stories, novels, human rights appeals, and political manifestos that were secretly circulated and in many cases also sent abroad. By the end of the 1960s, the leading writers and activists came to be known as the dissident movement. In 1973, still in the Soviet Union, and of course, the Soviet Union was still heavily communist and disgusting, he sent abroad his literary and polemical masterpiece, The Gulag Archipelago. This non-fiction account exposed the enormous crimes that had led to the wholesale incarceration and slaughter of many millions of innocent victims, demonstrating that its dimensions were on a par with the Holocaust. Solzhenitsyn's gesture amounted to a head-on challenge to the Soviet state, calling its very legitimacy into question and demanding revolutionary change. In response, strangely enough, the Soviets stripped Solzhenitsyn of his citizenship and expelled him to the West. He landed in America and spent most of the next 19 years in Vermont. And why not? He was able to collect the Nobel Prize he had previously been awarded in absentia back in 1970. Solzhenitsyn's desire remained to see the Soviet system brought down, and when the government of Gorbachev collapsed in 1991, he enjoyed both the thrill of success and the satisfaction of being proved right in his predictions of disaster. 3 years later, he returned to Russia and received a hero's welcome. Solzhenitsyn died in 2008. In 2010, The Gulag Archipelago was made required reading in Russian high schools. Moscow's great communist street has been renamed Alexander Solzhenitsyn Street. His centennial is being celebrated with great pomp in Russia, and a statue of him in Moscow is planned for the near future. Alexander Solzhenitsyn risked his all to drive a stake through the heart of Soviet communism, and he did more than any other single human being to undermine its credibility and bring the Soviet state to its knees. Which reminds me also that this week sees the 10-year anniversary of George W. Bush's classic, "I've abandoned free market principles to save the free market system." As far as I'm concerned, we live in democratic socialism, and when we are held in the EU, whether in name or name only or whatever, in April next year, it won't even be democratic. In November, a professional poker player locked himself in a dark room for 30 days on a $100,000 bet. Mr. Rich Alati had been allowed, he was then allowed back into the world on December the 11th because his $100,000 professional bet with Rory Young ended early after the two men reached an agreement after 20 days into the challenge. Young paid Alati 2/3, $62,000. Negotiations, in fact, began very soon after Alati entered the room initially, when they provided food to the guy. He originally offered $25,000 in exchange for allowing the, quote, prisoner, unquote, to leave the room immediately. The offer was quickly rejected, and the final payout amounted to nearly 2/3 of the original bet. Young said, "At the last food drop, he was stronger than ever. I underestimated his mindset, his resolve." You see, what it was a totally dark room. There was a toilet there was a bed, and he was given food at somewhere between 3 and 6 day intervals, so that he couldn't tell when he was getting the food and he couldn't count the days. What an astonishing thing. He couldn't see anything. He could hardly hear anything. It was totally dark. Can you imagine being in a pitch black room for a day? How about 20 days? And apparently he was on for 30 days. It's an astonishing achievement. Absolutely amazing. They should make a movie out of it. And by the way, if he had left the room, he would have had to pay Young $100,000, even if he was ill. So, fascinating. And of course, it all took place in Las Vegas. Absolutely fascinating. On Friday there, December the 14th, this is particularly interesting. In a ruling excoriating both the State Department and the Justice Department, U.S. District Court Judge Lamberth ordered both agencies to submit a discovery plan into whether Clinton tried to evade a Freedom of Information Act request by using a private email system. Well, we know that she made 30,000 emails on a private email system, which were in fact classified. And we know that she destroyed the computers, the servers. And we know that nothing has happened. I say lock her up if it's proven, which we know it's proven because we know it happened. Bring it on. And do you know that if you Google Hillary Clinton EM as in emails, Google will autofill to Hillary Clinton emoji. Search anywhere else and they'll take you to Hillary Clinton emails. This is what's happening, listener. Now, as you know, the Booms and Bust show takes a libertarian, free market, free-speaking bent, slant on what's happening in the world. And we also, in our markets considerations, we also try to give ideas to help you build and boost your eventual retirement fund. Ideas, not advice. So communicate with me on Twitter at Booms Busts Shows. You can ask as many specific or general questions as you want, and I'll answer them in a non-specific way. So, in other words, because it's not going to be advice, but I'll certainly answer them as well as I possibly can. If you want to email me, you can do at jd@theboomsandbustsshow.com. And indeed, if you have yet to receive the Booms and Busts report, a written document, which I think also is very useful to read in terms of understanding what's going on with regards to investments, just send an email there with your full name, and I assure you, you'll never be junk mailed. One of the strangest things that I saw recently was a gay pride, or whatever they call it, LGBT nonsense demonstration. And I've got a photo here of 4 young people, a boy and 3 young women, who I believe are gay. I couldn't say for sure. And they're holding a very large flag. On the flag, there's a rainbow flag painted on, as you could imagine. There's also a Palestine flag. And the caption is, "Queers for Palestine." Now, you lot are particularly intelligent. Could someone please tell me how it's possible that some young person who clearly looks like a graduate and probably is, and therefore something of an intelligent person, how they don't realize that the leadership of Palestine and most of the Palestinians are homophobic? Can someone explain that to me? Yeah, I must be incredibly thick. So what else happened this year? Tommy Robinson, of course, was sent to jail, then let out several weeks later, having lost lots of weight and looking white as a sheet, but he's back on form. His case is currently with the UK Attorney General, a politician who is sitting on it. Tommy and UKIP teamed up for a massive pro-Brexit march this month, and 17,000 people turned up. Absolutely sensational. Nigel, Kate and Jacob went to the, Leave Means Leave rally a few days later. 1,500 people turned up. As far as I'm concerned, the people, Nigel leaving UKIP is just on a massive ego trip, as indeed have the others who have left UKIP. Massive ego trip. Together, Tommy UKIP and Nigel, Kate, Jacob, etc., together they'd be a force, and they're playing directly into the Brimamers' hands. Well done, Nigel. You're such a great guy. So the Brimaner says we should never give the public referendums over complex issues with the EU. It has sown so much deep hatred, division in UK politics. It'll take decades to heal. It's non-binding in any case. Lever. So what's your solution to bringing people together? Brimaner. Another referendum! The Leave the EU Without a Deal in March 2019 online petition has now passed 170,000 signatures. Sensational. If you haven't signed, go and look for it and sign for it. Sign on it. It is today, the 17th of December, 102 days to when we are meant to leave the EU. I would ask you to remember the unicorn and believe it when you see it. So the socialist Tories have given the OK to councils up and down the country to increase council tax next year by 3%. So says the media. What a pack of lies. It's 3% above inflation. Don't be surprised if your council tax goes up by 5.5% or 6%. And let me remind you that approximately 30% of your council taxes goes on council staff and executives' pensions. I want to thank the listeners who have retweeted the Booms and Bust podcast in 2018. From download numbers, I can see that you're a solid bunch of folk who listen to this show. I see very similar numbers of downloads each podcast, very slowly rising, suggesting literally a handful newly coming to the show most shows. Listeners are solidly in the few hundred per show. We've got a long way to go even to 1,000 listeners, but the numbers aren't falling. So, for that, I'm most grateful and most thankful. Numbers are solid and they're rising, as I say, interminably slowly. I'm sure there are ways to publicise the podcast, but it's not how I make my living. So I'm not actually hugely bothered. Though I'd love it if thousands were listening so they would get to hear what I'm discussing. Politics, economics, markets, from a free market libertarian bent, and hopefully, as I say, to give you ideas to improve your investment and pension funds. And I might add, some of these political issues are so hugely important. This show ought to have 1 million listeners. But there you go. The easiest way to get the Booms and Bust podcast is to simply go on to audioboom.com, click listen, search Booms, you'll see the Booms and Busts, then click subscribe. It will then automatically go into your listening device when a new podcast is published. You can also go on to Podcast Addict. I'm also on iTunes, and indeed also the Jonathan Davis YouTube. So, moving to socialism, the National Union of Students has written to all candidates for positions within the organisation to tell them that all elections have been suspended, pending a review of which positions will be cut. We understand that as a result of a £3 million deficit, a host of full-time officers of the organisation will be cut. Indeed, the National Executive Committee will be, quote, gutted, unquote. The NUS is learning that the only way they can save themselves from bankruptcy is with sweeping austerity measures and living within their means. The NUS returning officer states that these are extraordinary times. The NUS is clearly facing a number of serious financial challenges, which at worst could result in insolvency. It is clear that there is likely to be significant cuts to NUS operating budget for 2019-20. After leading vehement and violent protests against deficit-induced government cuts in the coalition years, they're finally learning cold, hard financial realities, aka they're growing up. Talking of socialism, a shocking statistic has come to light. Venezuelans have lost on average 19 pounds in weight over the last year due to extraordinary food shortages. Isn't socialism wonderful? Just today on Twitter at Jonathan Davis, where the O is a 0, I was being lectured by socialists, by anti-Semites, that Churchill admired Hitler. Well, I think I tweeted back, yeah, if he did, it was in the same way that a burglar admires a police dog Alsatian foaming at the mouth. I had a lot of muting to do this morning. 28 minutes. Moving on to economics. There's an amazing chart of world GDP over the last 2,000 years. It's basically flat until the 19th century. More or less, the 18th century, it's hard to tell because because from a GDP of basically nothing in year zero, it practically goes straight up in the 20th century to world GDP of $100 trillion in, I think it's 2015 or 2011 money. So that's why it's $100 trillion. I mean, it's practically straight up in the last 100 years. And they say that capitalism is the font of all our problems. These people are absolutely, utterly mad. Now, very, very important you listen to this, listener. If you're interested in your investments and what's really going on in the world of economics. This Wednesday, the 19th of December, the US Federal Open Markets Committee, in other words, the Federal Reserve, they are going to probably, very likely as it happens, I've been saying it's not guaranteed, but it's very likely they'll be raising interest rates again, which will be the 9th rate rise in 3 years. So that will take them to 2.25% to 2.5%. Bearing in mind the UK is still at paltry 0.75. But what is increasingly likely is that the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, or Jay Powell as they call him, he will be announcing a slowdown in interest rate hikes following. So instead of the 4 that they've been expecting in 19 and the 2 or 3 in 20, I'm expecting them to say, to even use the word pause or something like that. And if they do, this could change the world of the markets. Now, before I say what that change will be, I want to mention as well that since Presidents Xi and Trump met just 10 days ago, President Xi is going to be presenting his plan of action to his senior people in the Chinese Communist Party tomorrow. Now, if we, over the next week or two, we get the following 2 things. 1, an announcement from the Fed that they're going to reduce their interest rate hikes for 2019 and 20. And B, that China is going to make big changes to the way they deal with America. In other words, to help America. In other words, that Trump is, in essence, will win. Then I think what we're going to see is the US dollar, which is still high. There's no question. At the last time I looked, in fact, I'm going to look right now. Just need to go to the right page. It's 96.7. It's been trading at 96.2 to 97.5 since my goodness, the beginning of January. It's not even moved 1%. This is the dollar index against a basket of currencies. It hasn't moved 1% in 6 weeks. We might see the dollar finally top out. Certainly the technical indicators are showing weakening is coming. Now that doesn't mean that it's going to come. It points to it's coming. And if the dollar weakens and starts taking out levels to the downside, you're going to see oil rally. You're going to see commodities generally rally. You're going to see Chinese stocks and emerging market stocks rally. You're going to see the likes of gold and silver and gold miners do a rocket ship. But until those things actually happen, nothing's happening. And if you look at the markets, very little actually has happened for weeks. I will come to stocks in a couple of minutes. That's really, really important. What I notice in the background to inflation is that in America, the National Federation of Small Businesses, the most number of small businesses plan to raise their prices than at any time since 2008. 3 in 10 of all businesses. Between 2011 and 2017, it hovered around 20% of businesses. It's now up to practically 30%. What else do we see that might be bearish the dollar? Well, at the end of this month, the gigantic European Central Bank money printing, the QE program, will end after nearly 1,400 days since March 2015. How much have they printed? 2,600 billion euros. That's 1.9 billion euros a day. And that's 7,600 euros per individual in the Eurozone. And of course, we know where this money went to whom it went to. And everybody who didn't receive this money is robbed. So that could be bullish, the euro. Now, you'd think it'd be already priced in, but I think the currency markets are waiting to find out about the Fed and Xi. That's what I think. So, let's see what actually happens. And, we're reading every single day that there's recession in the air. Well, it's true. Just today, South Korea downgraded its 2019 GDP forecast from 2.8% all the way down to 2.65%. Kel recession. Now, we know that one of the big problems out there is Deutsche Bank, by far the biggest bank in the whole of Europe. And it holds the biggest amount of derivatives of any financial institution on the planet. Now, they say that Germany is working on forcing a merger between Deutsche and Commerzbank, and that's going to solve all our problems. Well, first of all, Commerzbank's in the mire as well. It's not going to solve any problems at all. But the press, the media, will pretend that it is. So that could be positive for the markets. Just remember this: Commerzbank is state-owned and controlled. Thus, if this merger did happen, it would be not just a bailout. It would be just about the biggest nationalisation in the history of the world. Now, let's talk about stocks. Now, I said some weeks ago that it seemed to me that the midterm elections on the 8th of November could well be a catalyst, a springboard for stocks to get going again. Well, the S&P 500 I said that that Thanksgiving could well see a springboard for stocks. Well, we saw the S&P 500 then rise 7% and then fall 7%. It went from 2,600 to 2,800. It's now back to, it closed on Friday, get this, 2599.95. I mean, it's crazy. So, this is where we are. A couple of days ago, the Russell 2000, which is the top 2,000 stocks, which includes, of course, mid and small caps in America, it was down as much as 18% on the day. Not on the day, from the high at the end of September, which in fact was an all-time high. There are 3 times in history when the Russell has fallen that quickly. October 87. Do you remember the stock market collapse of October 87? April 2000, which began the dot-com collapse. August 2011. And then again, October and November and the beginning of December 2018. The thing I'd like to point out to you, such a swift move. In a bull market, markets go up on an escalator and down in a lift. Of the 3 last occasions that happened, 2 of them started a 2-year bull market, a mega bull market, and the other one started a bear market. So such a swift fall tells us not a great deal. It certainly should not be telling us we are in recession and we are in a 2008 crash. We have yet to find out. Now, there is no question, listener, you need to get this. there is a concerning look about the stock markets. Financial stocks are screaming caution. Since 1993, the only times the bank index has been at a new 52-week low and down over 20% from the high, while at the same time the S&P 500 was down only, quote only, 10% or less from the highs. The only two times in history was January to March 2000. As I say, that's preceded the dot-com collapse, and November 2007 to January 2008, which of course was in the throes of the 2008 collapse, which started in October 07. Things then got much, much worse in both those occasions for broad markets. So, if the banking stocks are doing that, we have to be, at the very least, very cautious. On the other hand, let's look at market sentiment, which is very important to me when I'm trying to understand what's going on in markets. The American Association of Individual Investors, the percentage of bulls positive on the market is 21%. This is the lowest level in 2.5 years. What happened 2.5 years ago when we had such low levels of bulls? We started a 2-year rally. At the same time, just now, the percentage of bears is 49%. It's the highest in 5.5 years. When you get such negative sentiment, this often marks a turn from down to up. In terms of the actual stocks themselves, the headline is bargain stocks. US stocks are now trading near their cheapest levels in almost 3 years. What happened nearly 3 years ago? It started a 2-year bull market. The percent of S&P 500 stocks above their 200-day moving average is now at 32%. This again is the fewest since February 2016. February 2016 marked the low in the stock market. 48% of S&P 500 stocks are more than 20% below their 52-week high. This is the highest percentage since the declines of 2014 and 15 into February 16 and the decline of 2011. And as I say, both of these periods or points in time marked the beginning of a major multi-year bull market. 2012, 2013 into 2014. And then 2016, 2017 into January 2018. So, yes, we should be very cautious. And indeed, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, this could be a 2008. But sentiment and valuation is such that it could be just a massive fake. This is mildly interesting. How many times in history has the S&P 500 been up at least 3% at the end of November and ended the year negative? In other words, was more down in December, taking the market negative for the year. Do you know how many times that's happened since 1923 when the S&P was launched? It's never happened in history. At the close of play on the 30th of November 2018, the S&P was up 3.2%. At the close of play on Friday the 14th of December, the S&P was down year to date 2.8%. In other words, it had gone down about 6% in just 2 weeks in December. Never in history has the S&P been up at least 3% and ended the year down. Now, of course, what that requires is that the S&P goes up 6 or 7% in the next 10 trading sessions to take us to the end of the year. Well, let's see what happens. Going back to the FOMC, we will have had 9 rate hikes in 2 days' time when they increase the rate, and yet the dollar hasn't even come close to taking out the high of January 2017. So although the dollar is high relative to the last 18 months, it's not even close to where it was at the beginning of 2017. And yet we've had all these interest rate hikes since January 17, suggesting that the dollar is not hot to trot to go up and up and up. Could it be that because the S&P 500 is currently down about, 3% for the year? Could it be that it's a consolidation year following the very big rises of 16 and 17? Look, there's no question that since the end of September, we are in a primary downtrend. The primary downtrend is defined very simply with lower highs and lower lows. And for the last roughly 7 or 8 weeks, we have seen, for 10 weeks, we are in a downtrend for 10 weeks. But put it into context. The FTSE 100 in the UK tried to get up to 6,900, 7,000 way back in 1999. Didn't quite get there. Did get there in 2007. Did get there in 2015. Did get there in 2017. Finally broke through in 2017. What is it trading at right now as I speak at 4:10 in the afternoon? Let's just go to the right chart. It's just opening up. It's currently 6,800. It's within a whisker of 6,900, 7,000. What I'm saying is it could be simply a retest of the biggest major breakout or breakup in a generation, in 2 generations. It goes up to 6,900, it goes up to 7,900, it goes back down to 6,800. In fact, 6,700 a week or 2 back. It's at 6,800 now. It could be this just going below 6,900, 7,000. It could be what we call a bear trap. It could simply be a bear trap, getting people to sell, 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 so that the big guys can then buy, buy, buy. Now, I know that I sound very bullish here. I do actually have also in my mind what I said earlier. The banking stocks are looking absolutely awful. Goldman Sachs is looking awful. These guys don't normally go down in a bull market. So we're watching. No question about that. I said the primary trend is down. I'm talking about the last 10 weeks. The big picture trend, of course, is still up. And until major supports are taken out, we're still in an uptrend, although it's painful. We could yet see the S&P 500, the FTSE, Euro stocks, you name it, we could yet see them come down 15 to 20% from the all-time highs before we get support. There's no question that's a big fall. But in the scheme of things, it's entirely manageable if, as I say, we get back above 7,000 on the FTSE, then we're very likely going to be in a multi-year mega bull market. Go over that again if you need to understand all the different nuances that I was raising there. I should mention government bonds as well. This is very important, government bonds. Given that the stock market has been weak since the end of September, so 2 months, 10 weeks, whatever, you'd have expected government bonds to be going through the stratosphere. They have gone up, no question, but they've only gone up since the beginning of November. They kept on falling in September. They kept on falling in October. The TLT, which is the ETF, the exchange traded fund of long-dated US Treasuries, went up from $112 at the beginning of November. It's currently at $119. So what's that? A 5% rise when we've seen the stock market? If you look at the index, it's gone down 10 to 15%. If you look at other indices, they're down 15 to 25%. And yet government bonds are only up 5%? Something not right. Something not quite right with those who say, well, bonds are up, therefore we're in a crash. They're not up as much as you'd expect if we were in a crash. What I'm finding very interesting is that, as I say, the dollar is holding up. It's higher than where it was in August, but only marginally. I mean, literally, like a quarter or a third of a percent. It's basically topped. It's been up here since August. And that's a long time to be doing nothing while you see the technical indicators falling. And yet, what did we see start rising in August? Only gold. Yes, gold had been rising since August. It hit a low of 1160 in August. We're currently looking at 1240. So whereas the dollar has actually risen a bit, gold has risen more. As I say, the 200-day moving average for the dollar stands at 1,254. We're within $12 of the 200-day. The 50-day, it's above the 50-day, and the 50-day is rising. Even silver's doing not too bad. It seems to have a triple bottom at just under $14. Every time it gets down to under 14, it immediately comes back up again. It's currently at 14.6. It's 200-day. It's above the 50. It's 200-day. It stands at 15.4. So, you wouldn't expect gold to be rising if the dollar was also rising. Is the gold market pointing to something really going on big time? What else has been happening this year? Bitcoin's had the fourth largest drawdown or fall in its history, down 85%. It needs to hold around here. If it doesn't, it's going down to 2,000. If it does, we could see a major rally. Sales volumes of houses in the UK, in 2015 you were looking at 110,000 a month. You're now looking at 85,000 a month. That's huge in the whole of the United Kingdom. Halifax and Rightmove prices, they appear to be basically flat, up 0.5 or 1%. It's basically flat, bearing in mind inflation's 3%. So there's something not right in the housing market. I've been saying it for quite some time. Coffee. Why am I talking about coffee? Well, next time you go into a coffee shop and you have to pay your £3 or £4 for coffee, just remember that coffee on world markets has gone down this year in the last 6 or 7 months from $1,800 a tonne to $1,470. And you see price rises in the coffee shop. What is that all about? Quotes of the week. Deng Xiaoping. He took over from Chairman Mao. He said, "To be rich is to be glorious." He was still a communist, as is China today. I got a couple of great ones from Frederick Bastiat. In war, the stronger overcomes the weaker. In business, the stronger imparts strength to the weaker. And yet they keep on bailing out the weak ones. He also said, if the natural tendencies of mankind are so bad that it is not safe to permit people to be free, how is it that the tendencies of these organizers are always good? And the last quotes of the year have to go to my hero, Professor Dr. Thomas Sowell. The least productive people are usually the ones who are most in favour of holding meetings. Nothing could be more jolting and discordant with the vision of today's intellectuals than the fact that it was businessmen, devout religious leaders, and Western imperialists who together destroyed slavery around the world. And finally, although the big word on the left is compassion, the big agenda on the left is dependency. Listener, I've had a blast all year. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being there. I'll see you next year.